Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam. I'm sorry I've been away for a few weeks, but I've been working on my own music again. But this week we're going to take a look at the music of a band I have a lot of affection for. It's multi-million selling folk pop harmony duo Simon and Garfunkel. Simon and Garfunkel met in school in Queens in 1953 and immediately stuck up a friendship over their love of music and harmony. They became a folk duo called Tom and Jerry and had a minor hit in 1957 with Hey Schoolgirl, but before changing their name to Simon and Garfunkel and signing a deal with major record label Columbia in 1963. They were enormously successful. They only made 5 studio albums, but they sold over 100 million units. And their music still resonates today, I think, with their biggest hits, now singer-songwriter staples you'll hear everywhere from the radio to the pub and many places in between. They had a famously fractious relationship. Paul Simon never quite felt that he got the credit he deserved for being the songwriter, and that art was taking too much of the limelight, especially after his vocal tour de force in Bridge Over Troubled Water. They eventually split in 1970, and although they reunited for a sort of stunning, legendary concert in Central Park many years later, the reunion was fleeting, and we're kind of just left with reissues and live albums now. Although, from what I can tell, there does seem to be some sort of appreciation, gratitude, and even love for one another after all these years. But I wouldn't hold your breath for any reunion. I grew up with Simon and Garfunkel in that my mother was a professional folk singer, and she used to sing loads of these songs, so I'd hear her practicing them around the house. My parents, of course, had all the albums, which I ended up pinching and ended up in my record collection. But there are, I think, a few things more beautiful in music than a two-part harmony being sung well, and Simon and Garfunkel were absolutely brilliant at it. Just watch how accurately they sort of navigate the complex harmonies and arrangements live on stage in the Central Park footage. Of course, Garfunkel's voice was the icing on the cake, but without Simon's songs, it would have meant so much less. And I think Simon is one of the great songwriters and lyricists of the rock and pop era, even though, for me, he can slip a little bit too easily into self-parody. Get me criticising the great Paul Simon there. But his intelligent lyrics and arrangements and deft guitar playing, I think, along with the duo's perfect harmonies, became one of the defining sounds of the 1960s, not least on the soundtrack to the landmark film The Graduate. Their recording timeline is a little bit messy, with songs being used and re-recorded more than once in different guises for different records, but we're not going to get too much into all of that. We're going to look at the 5 studio albums, and we're going to begin with their debut album from 1964, Wednesday Morning 3 a.m. Simon and Garfunkel signed to Columbia in 1963, changed their name from Tom and Jerry, and soon found themselves in the studio with producer Tom Wilson to make Wednesday Morning 3 a.m. It's an album Columbia marketed as exciting new sounds in the folk tradition, and this is very much a traditional folk album, owing, I think, as much to acts like Peter, Paul and Mary as it does to their huge inspiration and influence, the Everly Brothers. Of the 12 songs on here, there are 8 covers, many of them coming from the traditional folk genre. You've got Times They Are A-Changing as well, and Go Tell on the Mountain and Peggy-O. But of course the highlight here is the magnificent Sound of Silence, which I think is a song that was years ahead of its time. You've got to remember, at this time the Stones were still singing rhythm and blues covers, and the Beatles were singing about How I Want to Hold Your Hand. But this sort of dark, cryptic, hypnotic song, it had something magical to it, and although it wasn't released as a single at the time, it was to end up playing a crucial role in the duo's career. The album is a very pleasant listen. It's a little bit lightweight, Sound of Silence aside. Reached number 30 in the US and eventually went platinum, but its relative lack of success at the time was kind of dispiriting to the duo, and they split up, with Paul Simon moving to England to try a solo career. At number 4, I'm going to put their second album, the follow-up from 1966, The Sounds of Silence. So whilst Simon was in London, Columbia, knowing they had a bit of a special song with the song Sounds of Silence, they added electric guitar overdubs. and released it as a single in 1965, and it was a hit, prompting Simon and Garfunkel to reunite and capitalize on the song's success. Now, there's a little bit of debate as to whether this album was actually sanctioned fully by the band or whether it was released by Columbia without their okay. Either way, it's got a lot of Paul Simon original songs on here, written while he was away in England. Amongst the best known being I'm a Rock, which had been taken up by the Hollies and made a hit while he was in England, and Kathy's Song. There's also a cover of the Davy Graham folk guitar classic Angie on here. Columbia wanted to fill out the duo's sound a bit more with the drums and the electric guitars, much like they'd done on Sound of Silence. The song itself. You can listen to a song like Richard Cory and you've got this sort of big baritone guitar lick coming in, which was something I don't think perhaps Simon and Garfunkel ever envisaged in their sound. I question whether it always works. The album is under half an hour long and every track whizzes by in barely 2 minutes, but I think the more mainstream oriented production and instrumentation that Columbia have brought in here detracts from what makes Simon and Garfunkel great, which is just those harmonies working together. Listen to how beautifully April Come She Will stands out with just Simon's lovely guitar picking and Garfunkel's beautiful, clear, warm voice. Well, it got to number 21 in the USA, number 13 in the UK. It went 3 times platinum. And so the duo were really starting to get the kind of attention they'd always wanted. A lot of that success, though, is coming from the work done by Sound of Silence, the single, which had got to number 1 in the US charts. At number 3, I'm going to put their third album from 1968, Parsley, Sage, Rosemary and Thyme. So following the success of The Sound of Silence, the duo were now properly back together, and they spent 3 months in the studio rehearsing and arranging up material for this album. Paul Simon insisted to Columbia he had complete artistic control, and they were recording on 8-track for the first time, so they had much more creative freedom than they had before. They had the time and they had the technology. Again, many of the songs here were taken from Paul Simon's time in England, and it is littered with Simon and Garfunkel classics: Scarborough Fair, Homeward Bound, 59th Bridge Street Song, Feeling Groovy, and the beautiful For Emily, Wherever I May Find Her. And I think in many ways this was sonically a return to the folk leanings of the first album, but it's richer and it's deeper, the sound here, and also musically and literally it seems much deeper. And I find there's a really affecting juxtaposition between the feel of each song, which really works. And this is absolutely regarded as one of the duo's best efforts. Got to number 4 in the USA, 13 in the UK, triple platinum, and in 1999 was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. At number 2, from 1968, I'm going to put their fourth album, Bookends. Mike Nichols, the film director, had become obsessed with Simon and Garfunkel, and he paid Simon $25,000 for 3 songs for his 1967 film, The Graduate. Among those songs that Paul Simon pitched was Mrs. Robinson, and a shorter version was used in the film before Simon and Garfunkel released the full version on Bookends. The song gave the duo another US #1 hit, but we're getting ahead of ourselves because the first side of Bookends is a concept about a journey through life from childhood to old age. It's a slightly odd side of music. You've got the 32-second bookend theme coming in, which is an instrumental. And then you've got the very avant-garde Save the Life of My Child and Voices of Old People, which is literally 2 minutes of Voices of Old People. There's no music in it at all. Although along the way you do get the absolutely towering and magnificent America, which is one of Paul Simon's greatest songs. Side 2 here is a collection of largely unconnected songs that Paul Simon felt might have been a bit throwaway. But you do have some absolute crackers. Hazy Shade of Winter, which was many years later a big hit for the Bangles. And of course the aforementioned Mrs. Robinson, which is now one of the most famous acoustic folk pop songs of them all. There are 12 songs on here, and the album is under 30 minutes long. Most of the songs come in and over sort of just over 2 minutes long, and some are very odd, as you might expect, with an album which is sort of half a concept album and half not a concept album. The record came out 24 hours after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, and it sold in absolute droves, with many critics hailing it as comfort food music for a public still in shock and still reeling from the Dr. King tragedy. Mrs. Robinson became the first rock record to win Record of the Year at the Grammys. The album went #1 in the US, #1 in the UK, sold over 2 million copies, and Simon and Garfunkel now were absolutely in the A-list and the biggest duo in music around at the time. But my #1 Simon and Garfunkel album is their fifth and final album together from 1970, Bridge Over Troubled Water. By the turn of the decade, the duo were a really big deal, but Art Garfunkel, sort of inspired by The Graduate and his relationship with Mike Nichols, took a detour into acting while Paul Simon soldiered on writing songs for the band's next album. This division in interests and efforts was very quickly to become something of a problem and a millstone for the pair's relationship, but Simon's ambitions could not be quelled, and on Bridge Over Troubled Water he brought together elements of jazz, pop, rock, gospel, folk, soul, and for the band it was their most ambitious recording yet. It was the first album where Simon and Garfunkel credited session players on the sleeve of their records, players like Fred Carter and Hal Blaine, because all the players were from the famous Wrecking Crew. And I think the session players' increased role here in the performing and even in the arranging of the songs gave the music a new depth and dimension, which I think is probably best illustrated on the title track, where it's reported that piano player Larry Netchell came up with the iconic piano intro on the spot at Paul Simon's request for something gospelly. The title track, of course, is now one of the most famous epics of them all, and it's been covered by a vast array of acts, from Willie Nelson to Mary J. Blige to Aretha Franklin, Andrea Bocelli, even Muse, and many, many more besides. But it's far from the highlight here, because on side one alone you get also Cecilia, Keep the Customer Satisfied, and a really lovely cover of the Spanish traditional El Condor Pasa. On side two you get The Boxer, The Only Living Boy in New York, and appropriately enough on what's their last album, a cover of Bye Bye Love by the Everly Brothers, the band who inspired Simon and Garfunkel in the first place all those years back. As I said, Art Garfunkel getting more into acting, Paul Simon focusing more on songwriting. It drove something of a stake between the pair, and on top of that, their biggest song to date now was Bridge Over Troubled Water, which was actually all pretty much Art Garfunkel on vocals, and a lot of people thought that Art Garfunkel had written the song, or people who were new to the band thought that he was the band. And this really, really did rankle Paul Simon quite considerably, who had always had ambitions to be a well-known great songwriter, if not even a solo performer. The album nevertheless went to #1 in the US and the UK, many countries besides, 8 times platinum in the US, 11 times platinum in the UK, and to this day one of the best-selling albums of all time. 172 in Rolling Stone's top 500 albums of all time, #20 in the Times newspaper's top 100 albums of all time. But it was sadly to be the duo's swan song, as the relationship fractured beyond repair and they went their separate ways not long after its release. So away from Simon and Garfunkel as a duo, after they split up, Art Garfunkel carried on acting with mixed success, I think, and he had a modest solo career, albeit with a massive hit along the way with Bright Eyes, which was a big song on the soundtrack to the profoundly depressing cartoon Watership Down. Paul Simon, on the other hand, became a very, very popular solo artist in the 70s with albums like There Goes Rhymin' Simon. And in the 80s, his solo career even reached the MTV generation with the enormous Graceland album. He has, I think now for many decades, been one of the most respected and revered songwriters in popular music, and no doubt a future subject for Rock Records Reviewed. Well, look, that's my Simon and Garfunkel rundown. If you're new to the band, then your first stop is probably a Simon and Garfunkel greatest hits, which you can't miss. Every track on there is something of a classic. But I think Bridge Over Troubled Water is probably the best place to start if you want to investigate. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. I know it's a bit of a niche one, Simon and Garfunkel, and not necessarily rock, but what are you going to do? It's all great music, isn't it? I'll be back hopefully very soon for another Rock Records review. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Records review.